Hi, so for today's video, I'm going to show you a little bit about clustering and the process that I use, and that is helpful for teaching. So we're going to start by just looking at this layout right here, and I'm just going to go over a couple things to be aware of. So when you pull in your flowers, they're going to be all different sizes depending on what kit you're using. So don't feel like you have to use that size. Feel free to size things down. I like to size my flowers down and not use huge flowers just so that they don't overpower the layout. Another thing on this that I wanted to talk about is you can see this flower right here, this pink flower. If you were to see this in real life, three-dimensional, it would probably about an inch or so tall. And then you've got these other flowers that are typically a little bit of a flatter flower. So when you're designing a digital layout, you want to be aware of that and realize that this flower here would need to be above these flatter flowers. Now this one right here also has a little bit of a coil that's on top, and it's okay if it's tucked behind as long as that coil is moved out a little bit further than these flatter flowers. And then another thing that I wanted to talk about quick is if you're using a clip, for instance, like this one, if you think of the size that it would be if it were three-dimensional, it's going to be a little bit thicker also. So you wouldn't want to put your element, this time for this example, on top of the clip. Otherwise, it's going to be a really thick layout. Same with your flowers. So those are just a couple things that I thought that would be good to talk about before we go ahead and start with creating a layout. Okay, so a couple other things that I want to talk about when it comes to clustering is I like to think of a shape. So I've got, for example, I've got these three different shapes that you could use to do a cluster layout with. So this shape here is really good if you're going to do it on top and know that you can size things down or whatever, but this is a good shape to go off of as far as creating your cluster. This can also be rotated if you want to do it down the side of your picture frame. You can do something like that here. Even if you wanted to create a cluster along that little paper strip right there. So that's one that you shape that's a good one for clustering. And then you've got this shape right here that is good. This is a little big for this instance right here, but you can always shrink things down. But maybe starting out big with your cluster and then going to a smaller area. This also can be rotated if you want it to go, say for instance, down the side. You can also, it's a good idea to move it down here along the bottom where you have your main cluster here and then going out to a point. Go ahead and turn that one off. And this one here, this is the one that I'm going to show my class and tutorial on today, is just kind of a corner one. And like I say, it can be rotated and to go on either corner. You may even want to just create a cluster down here on your paper. But the main thing that we're talking about is this shape and how you've got this wider area here going out to narrow along the edges. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, just for teaching wise, is leave this here for now while we're creating the main parts of our cluster. So like we had talked about before, you're going to want the flatter flowers to be in the background, and then you've got your taller flowers, like this pink one, for instance, that you're going to raise above. So I'm going to go ahead and grab everything and move just my layers above that little shape, just so that I'm not having to go back and forth and move those as we create this. Okay, so I'm going to start with this flower right here and use this as my bigger flower in the corner. And I'm going to even size that down a little bit more. And a lot of times when I'm creating clusters, I'll create my shape and then I will select everything and size it down even smaller, depending on if I feel like it's overpowering my layout in my photo. So go ahead and do that. I'm just going to kind of create this and I'll talk you through it. This is another one of those flatter flowers that work good. And we're going to do this one just a little bit smaller than that corner flower. And that makes us so that we're working on our point down this way. This one here, and like we had talked about earlier, make sure that this one is above and not below your flatter flowers because it's going to be a taller flower. So if we were to visualize it in 3D, it's going to be, you're going to want that above your flatter flowers. I'm going to go ahead and size that down. So typically, a lot of times I'll do these two flowers that go off of that point, pretty similar in size. Then we want to do these flowers here are going to be an even smaller flower. So I always like to size down, see if you can see this. These are the same size. So I like to size that down just a little bit so that they aren't the same size. And this goes off of that point of your template. This one here, we're going to size that down also so that it's smaller than the pink flower. And put it right there going off of that point. And I think I'm going to duplicate this flower. So Control J is the shortcut that I use to duplicate. Grab that and then make this one even smaller than the peach one, just because I want to add a little bit more blue to my layout. And as you can see, this is my little grandson, and I'm not afraid to use flowers on my boy layouts. I use them quite often. If you don't like that, you can find other elements, but I don't mind using flowers, and I've talked to my kids about it and they don't care either, so we're good with that. And I like to rotate those a little bit just so they're not exactly the same as the flower that I duplicated, same direction wise. I'm gonna move this down just a little bit further, and you can see right there that we've got that little bit of that corner shape. So it goes from your biggest and then goes out from there to your smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that little template piece just so that you can see that we've got a cluster. And then as we talked about these couple elements, just to be aware of when you're using a clip like this, I like to size mine down. That's a little bit bigger than I would like to use. But when you're looking at this, you don't want to put this clip, as you can see, because you're going to be using this clip to hold that frame and that photo. As you can see right here, that this part of the clip is below the frame. And if that were in real life, I like to say real life on these, but I think you understand what I'm saying. You're going to want that part of the clip to be above the frame and the photo or whatever you're clipping, because that's just the way it would be. Now I can rotate this a little bit, but I'm going to want to move it up a little bit further, just making sure that realistically that clip is holding that paper down like it would normally. And then with this little element, we had talked about not putting it on top of the clip just because that doesn't make sense. So I'm gonna size this down a little bit, and then I'm gonna have my clip hold this little sun on. Using my control and my left bracket, that moves it down a layer. And you can use that to move up and down the left bracket, or your control right bracket moves things up a layer at a time. So that just makes a little bit more sense as far as your layout goes and where you place things. So you can see the difference already in these two layouts just by creating that little bit of a shape on your cluster. Now this shape could go on this top corner, like I said, or you could put it in a corner or whatever, or I could even duplicate these items and put them in another place. But that gets your cluster and looking great. So now we're going to go back to the kit and just finish off this layout by using some of the items in your kit that maybe you don't typically use or you overlook. I really like to use the ephemera in a kit just to kind of tuck it behind my clusters and my frames. So I'm going to hold my control key down and grab a few of these items to put in this layout. And it puts it over here on this top right corner. Turn this layout off since we're done using that. So I'm going to want to grab all these items, and using my left or right bracket, I'm going to move these up so that they're above my paper at least, and then I can move things as I create the layout. So I'm going to take this little bingo card that's a part of this kit that I'm using and tuck it right under my layout. This is a little big for me. I'm going to size that down and also tuck it kind of around the flower cluster that I did. Rotate that a little bit. These little notebook paper strips are always fun to use and tuck underneath your frame or your paper in a layout. So that one we're just gonna stick right there. Sizing's okay for me. This one rotate also. I'm gonna stick that so that it's sticking out from my paper strips right there. And then this last little ticket item, ephemera, I'm gonna tuck right down there. And these you just kind of play with and visualize. You've got your main cluster that we started out with. And these are just good items to just kind of tuck that are available in our kits that a lot of times you may not know how to use. So I'm just kind of showing you how those might be used. Okay, I think I'm gonna go grab a little grunge item and stick on this layout, maybe a couple other things. So here's a grunge, hold my control, whoops. Don't need to do that. Close out all that. Okay. So the grunge. I'm gonna grab a leaf Now I want some leaves. Maybe grab one of these little theme elements. See if I want to use that. And then I like to use tape. So I'm going to grab a piece of tape. And I'm just going to pull those over to my layout. Grab this grunge. I'm going to put it right here on my paper, maybe size that down so it's not quite so big. Just kind of tuck it underneath the corner. Move this up a little bit. I'm going to hit my control right bracket, click it one at a time till it goes to the layer that I want it to be. And I'm going to size that down so it's just a little bit smaller and tuck it up in these flower cluster. And I've got my leaf that I want to put behind underneath my flower. So I'm going to hit my control, use my right bracket to move that till it's the layer that I want it to be. Size that smaller so that it's in proportion with the flowers that I've chosen and sized at. I'm going to duplicate that by hitting Control J. Move it down here with these other flowers, size it down a little bit since these are a little bit smaller. Tuck that right here. It looks like I need to zoom in a little bit. You can see that it's below the paper, so I'm going to use my control right bracket, move it so that it's above that paper. Okay, so we've got that. Then we've got this tape I'm going to use. I like to sometimes put that underneath my clip. And you can see that it's below again. So I'm going to hit my control right bracket and move that one click at a time till it's on top of my frame. Maybe size that down just a tad. Center that over there. Okay, so like I kind of said beforehand, sometimes I like to size my cluster down even a little bit more, just because sometimes it just is a little bigger than I want. And I am going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to hold my shift key down and I'm going to select the layers that I want to size. Get all these flowers. Size those down together. Make that cluster just a little bit smaller. Didn't grab this flower, so I'm going to just tuck that down in here. Make that just a little bit smaller since it didn't resize. And then I can resize these leaves if I feel like they're still a little big. Okay, I like that a little bit more. Another thing item from our kits that I love using are our little banners. So I'm going to grab a banner to just put here along the bottom. Rotate that so it's a little bit more at the angle that I want it to be. And I just tuck that underneath my cluster here. So you don't have to show it all, I just this end. It's a good size. And then I like to add something that would be holding this banner on. So whether that's a button or a staple, we'll go and grab that. I think I'm gonna grab this staple. It's going to be over here in the corner. Oops. Try that again. Rotate this just a little bit so it's at better angle for me. Actually going to zoom in, hitting the Control plus so I can see where that is holding my banner down. Okie dokie. So we've got our layout. So the last thing that we need to do to finish this layout is to add our shadows to the items that need that. So your grunge, you don't ever want to add a shadow to that just because it's directly on your paper and it's not going to be lifted above it. So it's not going to have a shadow. But I am going to put a shadow on these other items. I've got those on my styles here. My flowers already had shadows on them, but I do need to put a shadow on the leaves and my ephemera and the other things that I added later. Grabbing that little strip instead of my ticket there. This little theme piece needs a shadow on it. And I know, let's see, this raised flower didn't have a shadow on it. And then my tape, I use this narrowest shadow because your tape is doesn't create much of a shadow. Okay, so I'm going to, let's see if I can trim this down so that you just see the completed layout here. Just crop that. Okay. Grab my move tool. Okay, there we go. So we have our completed layout. You can see how I create a cluster, sorry, different ways to do it. So remember that we have these other different shapes that are a good just different options as far as creating your cluster too. This one as well works well as a shape for filling in a cluster. So hopefully that shows you a little bit of how I do my clusters and create my layouts.